Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming to Introduction to Grief. I'm Dorian Morrell. I'm the hospital chaplain at ACMC. Let me introduce myself a little bit. I was educated through Liberty University, where I received my Bachelor's of Science and my Master's in Theological Study. Before that, I worked as a respiratory therapist for over 26 years in a trauma center. And I worked in a long-term care facility off and on, which was an end-of-life care facility. It was 40 beds. Every patient was trached and on a ventilator. And so that was kind of the beginning of my journey to be a chaplain. They were not in comas. These patients were alert and oriented often because they were Lou Gehrig's disease and ALS, traumatic injuries such as becoming quads from an accident. And I learned how to cope, which was interesting. So I had that work experience, and then I worked with Catholic Health Services, and I spent several years working for the Catholic hospital system in New York. And then I came here, and here I am. So what I want to talk about is that as healthcare workers, and some of you might be that are going to be here, you take care of patients for days, weeks, months, and sometimes years that these patients come in and out of the hospital. And so how do we cope with grief when we lose these patients? What do we do? How do we process this? And over a career, we can lose many, many patients. So the first thing I'd say is to take the time to grow and reflect on our own mortality. We are beings that are only here for a time, and when we accept that, and nobody likes to hear it, but the longer we live, the more people we lose. We lose parents, we lose family, we lose friends, and we lose patients if we're healthcare workers, and we've learned to process that. Acknowledge and deal with the loss and the grief that may occur even on the job. Process this together with your peers because they may be grieving too, and everybody wants to be strong, especially in healthcare. I'm okay, because I'll go on the floor and check on staff. Oh, we're fine. Meanwhile, they're crying outside the room, Make sure to have a full life outside of your job. It's important to socialize. It's important not to go to work and come home, go to work and come home and not do anything that's fun or interesting or relaxing, and don't feel guilty about it. You should always do that. Engage in self-care. We all need self-care. Self-care could be, I allow myself a manicure and a pedicure once every 2 months. Whatever it is, do it because you feel better. Even these little things, and they don't cost $1 million, so go and do them. Explore meditation and spirituality. People who meditate or find comfort in their church or fellowship with their church people, they usually have a more peaceful and comfortable existence. And then, of course, lean on colleagues, family, and friends for support. So from here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the different types of grief and the stages of grief. So, understanding grief. What is grief? Grief is anguish. And grief is loss. And it's not just the loss of somebody through death. It can be divorce. It can be moving very far from your family. It can be the loss of a job that you really loved and the people that you love there. These are all types of separation. And grief falls into this category. And so we should think about that and process that. Grief can have absolute physical pain. It's not just weeping or crying or feeling sorry, but people who go through extreme grief actually say everything hurts, from my head to my feet, my fingers, everything. I wake up and it hurts right away and I want to pull the blanket back over my head. That's grief. So that's the beginning of grief, how we understand it. Anticipatory grief is when we know somebody's dying. We have a family member or a friend, and we are now journeying with them on this trip nobody wants to take. And we say, how do we do this? My gosh, what do we do? So there's a lot of shock and denial that comes with that kind of grief. There's a lot of challenges. You're anticipating this loss. And it's not just illness, again. That's the big one, of course, is somebody with a disease that's going to take them from us. But divorce. You can see this marriage is going down the tubes. What do I say? How do I tell my friends? How do I tell my family? How do I tell his family? Whatever it is. These are big, big losses. So how do we process that? And then there's grief from a sudden loss. Somebody leaves, you say goodbye, they have an accident 10 minutes later. And one of the big things of grief, and that doesn't have to be only on a personal level, but when we have national grief, 9/11 is national grief. Something traumatic happened, it affected the nation and the world, really, because there were many people from all over. New York has every culture, and these people were killed too. Also, when you have tornadoes and earthquakes, anything that takes people suddenly is felt often by that area, that region, that nation, and sometimes globally. So that is grief from a sudden loss. It's not always on a personal level. And people who experience 9/11, and I'm speaking about this because I lived 40 miles from the towers. And in that area, and I wondered how the rest of the country processed it, but we were so close. And I worked in a trauma center as a respiratory therapist, and we were on disaster alert. So we had people come, because the hospitals in New York City were devastated. They couldn't handle anymore. And so they were coming onto Long Island, onto other trauma centers, and to deal with these people who lost coworkers or friends or family or whoever was in that area when this occurred. It was huger than any of us could imagine. It was a war zone. So I just wanted to speak a little on that because these are personal things, and sometimes personal stories, they kind of sit with us and we turn them over in our heads and think about them. So the death of J.F. Kennedy, most of us are too young to really remember that, but if you ask people who are older, they remember the nation was in shock. Martin Luther King, that assassination, these are all, again, national, sudden losses. So grief has many forms, cumulative grief. They say death happens in threes. So we know that happens. We know that we lose. Sometimes it happens. I know I experienced it. I'm sure others, I've spoken to patients who tell me they've had that happen. And I lost, and it sounds funny, but our fur babies, I put mine in the same category, and if you have a beloved pet, you feel that way. So I know for me, I lost my mother's cat, then my mother, then my dog, then my mother's younger sister, and a girlfriend, all within 3 months. And I know I was hurting, like I said. I was continuing, I was going to work, I was putting on the face, but I was feeling it. And again, that can happen also not just with personal things, but it can happen with national things. You'd be surprised, people even react if they lose their favorite movie star or singer, they have a breakdown. So that's cumulative grief. I hope I'm not moving too fast. If I am, tell me. And then we have something that a lot of people don't like to talk about, and that's the absence of grief. Why does that happen? So sometimes it happens because somebody's been sick for such a long time that you've actually grieved during their sickness, during their slow decline. And by the time they actually pass, you are either kind of like, you kind of melt, or you just are like, oh, okay, now what? And the crying doesn't happen as much or as frequent or as hard as somebody who maybe has sudden loss. So there shouldn't be any guilt with that kind of grief. It is natural, and sometimes some people don't grieve, especially publicly. They are very quiet, they don't talk about it, they do their crying over here, and it's not necessarily the absence of grief, it's just the way we grieve, and we're entitled to grieve as our bodies allow us to. So those are all normal. So of course we all know there are stages of grief, and the stages of grief are not necessarily in the order that I'm going to give them here. They can happen at any time. Something hits you, something triggers something, and you may fall into one of these categories. So let's see. So the 5 stages are unexpected, And it is very common to go through all of them. So the first one is usually denial. No, they can't be dead. No, that diagnosis, that can't be right. The test results were wrong. We minimize the event. Can't be. I know personally that's my character. I've done that and not even realized it until after the fact. And I've done it with myself. This can't be right. Can't be. And so that's the first step. The second is anger. And usually, if it's not within the family, that sometimes people get mad at each other. It's usually at God, and it's, how could God allow my mother to pass? She was a wonderful person. She was lovely. How could he take her from me? Why did she deserve to die? Well, she was 94. You know what I mean? Reason doesn't come into play when we hit that anger point, you know. I've been with families with stuff like that, and you're like, wow, I thought they would handle this easier. But again, we're individuals, and the way we process is all very different. The biggest one with anger is suicide. If somebody commits suicide, the anger is shifted in various ways. They're angry at the loved one, they're angry at themselves, they're angry at a family member, whatever, but the anger is very prevalent in suicides. So, and some of this should be processed actually in group, and we'll talk about that too. And then number 3 is bargaining. Okay, Lord, if you let them live, I will, quotes, whatever it is. And you see this a lot, I mean, in many areas, but I've seen it a lot in miscarriages or if a baby dies, is a lot of bargaining. Oh, Lord, why did you take my baby? I promise I'm going to save them, and I'm going to take them to church every Sunday, and I'm going to bless them and take them to Sunday school, and there's all kinds of promises made because we look for a divine being to intercede and make it right. And that's a very human behavior to do that. So we see it again, babies and miscarriage, it happens everywhere, but I have seen it a lot in that area. And then the promises, you know, we promise. Sometimes others we promise this, you know, your mom, your dad, whoever is left. I promise I'll be here for you. I promise I won't leave you, especially since dad is gone, if that's the case. But again, that's normal. And if we are receiving that, we have to kind of process and know that's in the moment now. We don't know if that's going to be, the promise is going to be kept, whether it's good or bad. But it is part of the process. And then depression sets in. And depression can be short or it can be long. It's the reality of what is actually happening. So sometimes denial and anger and bargaining go into the depression, but it all comes to a head and depression is there. And then it's how long can we sit in that depression? And when should we be concerned that they're depressed too long? So that's something we have to kind of observe as family members or friends of somebody who's going through this. But a lot of times they feel hopeless and alone all of a sudden. And I'm going to say with family, as we lose family members, part of our history is kind of gone. I've seen that as I get older, I've seen it happen. And it's hard to face that our own history is slowly vanishing because of the loss of these members of our family. It's usually within family. It doesn't mean it can't be friends. If you have a long history of friendship with this person and they're gone, you feel that void and you may get depressed. You may not get out of bed. I can share when my father passed away, my mother took to her bed and she didn't get out for 3 months. And I was blessed, I was young. I was in my mid to late 20s and I had a full-time job. I was like, oh, what am I gonna do? And so I had a great aunt, who was my father's aunt, and she came and stayed with my mother for 3 months. She cooked for her, she made her eat, she made her get up and shower. And if I didn't have that great aunt, who now herself is gone, I would have been, I don't know what I would have done, because she truly took to her bed after it. And often that kind of depression comes when you're the caregiver, and you've been at this person's side for X number of years, hearing every thought, taking care of every need, And all of a sudden, after maybe several years of this kind of commitment to this loved one and situation, they're gone. Depression's going to set in because that is life-changing now. What do I do now? Where do I pick up the pieces? How do I pick up the pieces? And even when my mother came out of that stupor, and my father was ill for a number of years, she was a little lost, I have to say. It took her a while to get her bearings again. So, and finally, the fifth step is acceptance. We realize, this is how it is. And it doesn't mean the pain's going to go away. It just means it may sneak up on you in a different way. You may think you're fine, and then all of a sudden, again, a trigger happens. And that's what happens. We cry again, and the wound is a little bit open, that scab. But you've accepted, and you know that you have to go on living, and you have to think about the grateful time and the memories that you had with this person, because that's what's left, and that's the way we honor them and their legacy, is to move forward in the way that you know your loved one would want you to. So that's when acceptance happens. And you have to remember that the stages of grief feel very different to every single person. You and I will not process the death of a loved one the same way. Even if the relationship is as close, we could say, I loved my mom so much, I was there, we shared like girlfriends when we were adults or whatever. Or your spouse. Spouse is a big one, the loss of a spouse. Kim and I have facilitated grief groups through the hospital, and most of our people, almost like 90%, right, have lost a spouse. And they're all ages. I've had young people, 50s. And it's good when we gather them together because they can process what's happening together as a peer group. It's really kind of interesting to watch a group. We were doing an 8-week group. So we would try to start in September, and we would carry this group until November, like the middle of November. And our purpose was, at the time, was to get them prepped for the holidays. End of November is Thanksgiving. If you lost somebody in, May, you really are dreading comes Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so this group kind of helped softly lead them into that. And it worked very well. We've done several groups here, and the last one, I take this and I own it. I made a grave mistake. We had a group that was very supportive of each other, and they said, we don't want to do 8 weeks. We want more. And I asked permission. They said, okay. Well, we went until June. Well, it wasn't good for me. It was too long to support this group for that long. And at the end, we finally said, we're going to let you all go, because our progress in this group is that now you lean on each other. You've made friends, people call each other, they would meet for coffee without me, they didn't need me there anymore, they could do it on their own, and they have. As a matter of fact, I received a phone call yesterday from somebody, and he said he had coffee with another gentleman from the group. So it has worked that they are carrying some of them forward. If they meet once in a while, it's still, they have this camaraderie of that loss of that loved one, and all of them it was spouses. So they really understood. A lot of times they come in and they go, I thought I was crazy because I was acting this way and that way. And somebody else will go, I do that too. And then all of a sudden they realize it's their way of grieving. Whatever it is, set a dinner plate for their spouse who's gone already for 6 months, things like that. And other things. Can you think of anything, Kim? No, but that kind of thing, like just repeated things, or just the anger is unbearable. And expressing it is so comforting to do that. And a group is a very safe place. And we like to have a chaplain and a social worker, because together we can kind of help them and pull them into different directions of needs that they may have. So we try to do that. And it's not uncommon to receive grief in great waves. Like it might be great for 4 months, and all of a sudden you open a letter or a gift or something, and boom, tears come. It's all healthy. Crying is cleansing, and so it's okay to cry. So go ahead and cry, because that's all right. And you actually sometimes feel better. You go, you know, I cried for 20 minutes, but I feel better. And so go ahead and do that because that's fine. Now, of course, there's no real length. We don't say, you know, oh, you should be over this, it's 8 months or it's a year. Because we are different as humans. Our grief is different, we carry it different. But when does it actually become unhealthy? When is it prolonged grief? And what is normal in the grief? So, and there's complicated grief. So it's, again, it's different for everybody, but if you see that somebody's struggling, and it's been, I mean, I have had people come, and I'd say this is prolonged grief, into our grief group and tell me, my mom's been dead 6 years. Now, I think it's good they've joined us because they are stuck. So it's a step. Sometimes it might take more than just us to help them work through that. Because, you know, you journey through grief. You're never over it. It's a journey through it. From the new grief to accepting what was to entering the new existence in your life without this loved one. And so I would say that we need to then maybe see a therapist or somebody. It's great that these people, like I explained, have to come to a group because that's number one step. I'm taking action, I'm motivated. I realize 5-6 years is a long time. Not that we ever don't cry about these people, but we need to go on with life. And that's what our loved ones would want. They would want us to continue in life, sharing and understanding with their memories still here. It's okay to talk to them too. Get in the car when you're by yourself and talk to them. You can talk to them in the mall now too, because you know you can make believe you're on the phone, so that works also. But so here's complicated grief. So complicated grief is severe, and it would interfere with your everyday existence. It's a personal relationship that might be suffering. You may not be getting along with friends. People start to abandon people when they say, oh no, I can't come, oh, and people invite them and they keep saying no to these invitations. Oh, I'll take you out for lunch. No. You gotta push yourself through that and go. It's healthy to do that. But if you start to find that, and the symptoms are very complicated, so here are some of them. Feelings of prolonged pain, bitterness over your loss. So if you still have that pain 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, you're still waking up and putting the blanket over your head and not getting up until 3 in the afternoon, you might need to speak to somebody. Bitterness to others. Well, they're still here in your mind, they're thinking, and they're not even a nice person. You know, we rationalize all kinds of crazy things in our head as humans. Feeling unusually saddened, having guilt, blaming yourself for your loved one's death. Why did I bring hospice care in? That's called mercy. And it's okay. People beat themselves up over that. The end result would have been the same and prolonged, and usually with discomfort. So I recently had somebody suffering from that, and it was, we had to keep telling them, you did the right thing. And often the person who's ill is ready to go, and it will verbalize that at times. Why doesn't God take me? I've heard that many, many times visiting people. So, longing for your loved one intensely and persistently, or struggling to accept your loved one's death even after a number of years. I can't believe they're dead. They've been gone 6 years and you've been living. You love them and they're in your heart forever. But they would want you to have life. Having trouble focusing on anything else but your loved one and their death, especially focusing on that death process. Some people just can't seem to process it and put it there. Death is natural. And it's, you know, natural course, especially when I have people who lost their children, is that, I mean, their parents, is that that's the way it's supposed to be. The parents are supposed to go first. You know, we love our parents if we have good relationships and we accept them, but it's the natural circle of life is that they're going to go. And they wouldn't want it any other way. They don't want to lose you. They say, take me. You know, losing a spouse is very difficult. This is your partner for life. You've shared many, many things, especially if you've had a very long relationship. So that's the next thing that I would say is really difficult is spouses. And those are the people who actually come for help, seems to be people who lose the spouse. And then, of course, the child is the hardest, because losing a child is just out of this time frame. It's not supposed to be. It's never supposed to happen. I'm supposed to be here and watch you grow up, and then you're supposed to kiss me goodbye, not the other way around. So that is the most difficult and challenging. So any of these, though, that you're struggling with and it's been for a long time, find a group, find a therapist. That's what's needed. Focusing intensely or avoiding any reminders of a loved one. Now, some of us do that because that hurts so much, and we take the pictures down that were there for years. I did that when my father died. I couldn't look at his picture. But then they came back up, so it was all right. You know, it took me a year maybe, and when I lost my mother, that was easier. I didn't take her pictures down. So maybe because I was older, and she was 94, so God bless her, she knew and she wanted, and she was one of those people, I'm ready. But my father was young at 60, and so that was too young to go in my head. And I was young too, so. Having trouble recalling positive memories of our loved one. Things get foggy. We don't want to lose those memories, and it's okay to share them. I think it's okay when sometimes some people want to hear about their loved one and talk about them and share them with people. This is what happened, and we had a wonderful day together. And those memories are beautiful, and they're okay to share because they make everyone smile. That was beautiful. Aren't you glad you have that memory? It's so special. And then feeling numb or detached from your everyday existence, having trouble going through everyday routines, sometimes losing jobs because you're so unfocused. That's a problem. You know, we may have to go for help when that happens. But it is, again, part of grief. Early on, that's all these things are acceptable in the first year, I'd say. When you get into year 3, I'd be worried. Feeling that life holds no meaning, and feeling that life without this loved one isn't worth living. And the last one is suicidal thoughts. Now, of course, that's all really dangerous when somebody gets like that. So we need to watch our friends and family who might be going through this and aid them a little. Hey, you know, I heard there's a support group over here. Maybe you should go. Maybe I'll go with you. Whatever it takes, it's important. We had somebody who had survived. They had lost a family member to suicide, and that person was so angry, and it had already been, I think, maybe 2 years. And they were still so angry, and you know, she wouldn't stay. I can't talk about it. But she left with such anger. I don't know how she's functioning. I felt bad. I felt she needed to be there, but you know, we don't force you to stay. We welcome you. We leave the door open. You come and go as you please. I worry about that. That's somebody I would really worry about. Yeah, and her anger was so intense. So those are the things we have to look for when we are dealing with somebody who's grieving. And like I said in the beginning, we understand it. That first year or 2 is acceptable. When it gets longer than that, I would be concerned, you know. And grief, again, is different for everybody. So that's persistent bereavement and complex bereavement disorders. There are many. I've seen people suffer with this. They still are going through, and I mean years, like 6, 7, 8 years down the road. I had a young woman come in New York when I was living there. Her mother had been dead, and she was still, it was almost like ritual. Oh, mom likes her plate here and the flowers here. It was like she was there. She did come to support group, but she didn't stay. She was there for a few sessions. She didn't want to stop acknowledging her because I think she felt she would be like she never existed. But you know, our loved ones exist to us and to those who love them as family and friends. We're not in history books, all of us. None of us are, you know, in that place in life, but that's okay. Our existence is important to others in this world, however we look at it. And it's always good to remember somebody in a good way. That's why suicide is so the worst, because you could be the greatest father, mother, friend, but if you commit suicide, the only thing people will remember is, oh yeah, that person committed suicide. – That's the memory that sticks with them. So we try to honor that in a different way. Honor their lives by talking about the good things that happen, not that moment of loss, not that moment of indecision. So how to cope with the grief and loss? Grief feels very isolating. So try to stay connected to your friends and family. Lean on your support networks. Sometimes that could mean a church group. If you have a church group, of course, go to them. Sometimes it's other clubs. I know a bunch of ladies that do a knitting club, and they support each other through all kinds of things. I have a church group I was involved with was a widows group, widowers. It was mostly widows, but they would do field trips once a month. They would go to the winery and apple pickings, and it made them get out and look forward to something. And they helped each other greatly through their grief. And they're still like visiting with each other like years later because the group has supported people who were there. And as new came in, they took on their little sisters, so to speak, and supported them and helped them and encouraged them. So these are very important things. Mental health workers can sometimes be activated if needed to help with grief, if it is, again, prolonged or suicidal tendencies because they're so lost or feel like they have no meaning in life. You want to go back to that. And then again, a group is great because a group experiences things together. They share these things that they actually have in common. We all have things in common. We're human. We live our lives. We have our families. We love. We get angry. And sharing these moments, one of the things we encourage in group is to bring in a picture of your loved one. Whatever picture you want. It can be when they were young, it can be when you were married, whatever it is. And people like that. It's like show and tell. They talk about their loved one. Not that there aren't tears, but it's in a meaningful way. Like, oh, look how handsome he was. Whatever it is, it brings these people together and it's comforting. So we celebrate these people. We love them, we celebrate them in whatever form we can, and we support each other and our other loved ones and friends during this time. So working through your grief is beneficial. It brings people together, people who understand each other and can support each other. People support each other when they recognize themselves in somebody else. That brings friendships. People realizing, well, I'm not crazy. This is the way it is at this time, and I'm going to get through it. At the hospital and outside the hospital, we do our grief supports, so look for them. Some of the churches do sponsor them. So Kim may know some of them, and the sessions are great. And remember that holidays are a very tender time for people with that. So, and the last thing I want to speak about is grief in children. So when a child loses someone, how do we handle that? Now that's very different. We've been talking about mostly adults losing a partner, a friend, a parent. What happens when a child loses anybody? So children deal with new experiences all the time. Some of them are pleasant, some of them aren't. But be open to speak to your child during difficult times. Encourage them to express their feelings. And know that sometimes a hug is worth all the conversation in the world. Be able to gauge with your child, because death should be explained in your own tradition or religion. It might be easier for that child to process it if they've learned something in Bible study, in Sunday school, or whatever the religion is. All religions have something, some answer to death, whatever it is. But death is natural, and we have to explain that to children. And bring more comfort and feel more natural to your child during the time. And it's all right to cry. People say, I don't want to cry in front of my child. No, cry with them, hold them. Say, it's okay, we can miss them. We can miss grandma, we can miss dad, whoever it is. But, we need to let them know that we feel like they do. But we're together and we're going to get through this together. Keep a close eye on children. Sometimes there's signs of prolonged depression. And this may seem, you might see this in socialization changes and eating habits and playing habits. And it could lead to a growing problem. So if that happens, don't go crazy. If it's still early, they're going to have bouts where I don't feel like playing with Timmy because his grandma's over. Or, you're going to get reactions like that. But if it becomes like they're not playing outside anymore with their friends, and they are just sitting there, you need to take them. So I have here pictures, and this is a little story I'm going to share with you. And it's a little book I wrote when I was finishing my seminary. And we were asked to pick anything we wanted. And I thought about children's books about grief. And I went to the library and I looked up a bunch of children's books and I didn't like it. I was very fussy. To me, a leaf falling off a tree was not death. It grows back, you know. But so I wrote a story. And I actually offered this during a big to-do. Like, I was educated in the Catholic Church, so the bishop was there and all our graduation, and I actually did this presentation for them, and they liked it. So, and it is in the process of being published. It's with a publisher right now. So I'm a little lazy and I haven't been working as well as I should with them, but so it's Sparkle and Wink are forever friends. Sparkle and Wink were the best of friends. Every day they would play and pretend among the flowers and the trees with the butterflies and bees. During the day they would flutter with the breeze, here, there, and everywhere. During the evening they would look at the moonlit sky without a care. Such happy little garden nymphs. The more they would play together, the brighter their wings would shine. One day, Wink's wings did not shine so bright, and Sparkle looked on with some fright. "What's wrong, Wink?" is all that Sparkle asked. "I don't really know. I hope this won't last." But as time passed, Wink just seemed to fade, till she could no longer fly, just rest and stay. Sparkle stayed by Wink's side, a true friend till the end. "Don't leave me, Wink. You have to try to mend." Wink said, "My time of twinkling here on earth is coming to an end. And when you look to heaven, you will see me there, my friend. So when you are alone and afraid, look for me. I will give a sign, a message to see." And then it happened. Wink no longer did light. Sparkle cried and cried as the other nymphs came to say their earthly goodbyes. Time passed, and Sparkle did not want to fly or play, even when others would come by her way. But as Sparkle looked up at the night, there before her was a message so bright. Thousands and thousands of stars lit up the sky, and Sparkle knew Wink had told her no lie, for there was Wink's message in the light of the night. Though Wink was no longer here playing on earth, her light shone brightly for all it was worth. So with a happy heart, Sparkle could again shine, knowing her friend Wink was in heaven and fine. So love continues on earth, in heaven, and always forever and ever. Amen. And so I'll leave you with that. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. No? Well, I did a good job. You have no questions. Yes?
You talked about explaining to children. What about explaining to an older person with dementia issues?
You know, I would think that might be very childlike and maybe go along with that. I think my book is great. I brought this book into the dementia unit at a facility I worked for, and they loved it because I put the pictures up and they're very colorful. I also illustrated it. So, and some of them who still had some reason, they said to me, "It's very true. The story was very true. It touched them." So I think speaking to them like a child, very softly, just that, you know, somebody's not here anymore, and whatever your religious beliefs are, to go with that and to offer that as support. Anything else?